colleague at the University of Toledo. Dick is a retired UT faculty member who taught courses on international politics, foreign policy, and politics in Africa. He spent 7 years in Lesotho, Botswana, and South Africa, teaching in regional universities and doing research on Lesotho politics and Southern African regional organizations. Since retiring, he and his wife, Chris, have taken multiple cruises in diverse regions. And Chris, who occasionally asks a good question or pops in with something if Dick needs a little help, needs a little bit of an introduction too. She previously taught international business at Bowling Green, worked as an auditor for Price Waterhouse in Botswana, and has a long-term interest in Sweden, where her father's family originated. So let's welcome Dick, who will be talking on Botswana, 1965 to 2022, a remarkable transformation. Dick?
We'll give Chris the mic just in case she wants to say something. Okay, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the map because Botswana isn't familiar to a lot of people. Is this working?
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, much of what you see will be in the southern part of the country, southeast, where the vast majority of the population live close to the border, because much of what's out here is sand desert, bush desert, and sparsely populated. During the talk, we're going to move up to the north. Toward the end of the talk, you will see some of the wildlife around Nada. You will see us take a trip across the Kalahari to Maumee, and then up along the Okavango swamp to Shakawi in the north. We'll visit Sadilu Hills, and then we'll come back this way across the desert. I particularly want to emphasize, you'll see it twice, this very small border, less than 500 feet between Botswana and Zambia, which became a lifeline during the early independence period, and now has taken on new significance, which you'll see. It's a small country, 2.5 million people, but a huge country in terms of area, slightly smaller than Ukraine, slightly larger than France, subtropical climate, and as I said before, desert. Why isn't this moving ahead? Oh, there we go.
There you go.
I'm moving ahead too fast. Okay, one book. Okay, it requires a delicate touch. Okay, fine. I'll get the hang of it. Botswana emerged independence in 1966 in a very difficult neighborhood. Its only outlet, as I mentioned before, was to Zambia, which wasn't controlled by white minority-ruled nations. Namibia by South Africa, then Southwest Africa. Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, under white colonial rule, and South Africa under apartheid. And nearby were the Portuguese colonies, Angola and Mozambique, which were also under white rule, and which both had civil wars going on at that time. The British thought of Botswana, which they called Bechuanaland Protectorate, as a burden, because they saw no prospect at all for its development. One reason they were interested was it was an outlet to the north. And what they wanted to do was prevent the Germans, who initially controlled Southwest Africa, from connecting across Africa to Tanganyika, their other colony, and they wanted the Portuguese to not to connect up between Mozambique and Angola, which would block British expansion northward. Now the amazing thing was the colony was administered from what was called the Imperial Reserve. Its capital was in South Africa, not within its own borders. And this is what the capital of the colony looked like at the time of independence. I took a picture later on. Had the resources under that desert, the diamonds, the copper, the coal, the soda ash, been known, I doubt that Botswana would have been an African majority country at this time. It would have certainly been incorporated in South Africa and within the apartheid system. Okay, my first visit was in 1965. This shows the railway to the north. The main, one of the main sources of economic activity at that time. You see the distance in miles to neighboring areas. The capital is called Gaborone, which was a British version. The name of the capital in Botswana is Gaborone, which I will call it. This is the Great North Road connecting British colonies in the north and south through Botswana. You're going to see this little beetle with its Lesotho license plates quite a few times. You can see it standing next to one of the largest structures at that time in Botswana, the termite farm. This is a road grader at that time. They took a tractor and they took a bunch of thorn bush and attached it to the back and then smoothed out the sand. A new capital was under construction in what's Gaborone, and in 1965 you could see as workers came in to work in the construction, there weren't homes for them. They lived in this rough, crude village built from whatever materials they could find. And the amazing thing about this is 13 years later, I would never imagine that I would be living on that very site. The Botswana government was building housing for its workers, or the British government for the future Botswana government, and you see some of those. Why am I wearing a suit? Well, I went to visit the Deputy Prime Minister, and he insisted I go see the new reservoir which was serving would be the eventual capital. And the reason he had me go there was as they started construction, the British were sure there would never be enough water. So they were rather careless in the initial construction, and a major storm occurred and it washed a lot of it away, so they then had to rebuild. And this is still the primary water resource for what's now a capital of almost 300,000 people. At the time you were seeing it, there were barely 5,000 or 6,000 there. And you'll see the person who I was with, who I somehow neglected to take a picture of, the man who became the president of Botswana in 1980. You see the little beetle again on the left, parked in the government mall under construction. As you can see, the thorn bush hadn't even been cleared away yet. With my friend who I was traveling with to Zambia, we went north. And this village was the capital of the Amato Kingdom, a portion of Botswana, the largest kingdom. This is perhaps a picture of a tenth of it. But what you see is, in the traditional form, extended family units where grandparents, parents, cousins, uncles, aunts would be living together in a family cluster. And throughout the village it was like that. Note also how few buildings there are that have tin roofs. It's thatch. It's reeds that taken from these streams. Okay, we're at that point in the north, connecting Zambia and Botswana at the time. And we were about to get on the pontoon ferry, which I think had 2 5-horsepower Johnson Seahorse outboards running it to go across. So what's the area there right in front of it is Southwest Africa, the Capri Strip. Down here is the Chobe River, which joins the Zambezi at that point. Remember this view, and one of the last pictures, you'll get another view of it today. Oh, we went across into Chobe Park at the time. We were in a little beetle, you see the shadow of it there, and we met some of the local inhabitants. And if you look very closely, you'll see a tire track. You can never imagine how fast a beetle can go in reverse encountering an obstacle. And you'll see elephants like this in some subsequent pictures with some famous people there. Now I'm thinking, we had no Wi-Fi, we had no phones, there were no rangers in the area at the time. We were out there in the sand in our VW. And I think of how crazy I must have been at 25 when this picture was taken. Okay, I want to introduce you to Seretse Khama, the first president of Botswana, who when we came back in 1978 was being installed in his role as president as the honorary head of the University then of Botswana and Swaziland, now simply the University of Botswana. He was president of the country from independence to 1980 during the time we were there. The Khama story is fascinating. He was the heir to the kingship of the village I showed you, but educated at Fort Hare. At the time Mandela was there. And then he went off to study law. He was the heir to the Rwanda Kingdom, which was controlled by a regent. However, the plot thickened. In London, he met Ruth Williams, a secretary, who he met, I don't know, I forget how, and he married her in 1948. Well, South Africa had just passed a law called the Immorality Act, which made any kind of sexual liaison, married or not, among people of different races illegal and subjected to a prison term. So when he returned to Botswana land, that was very controversial. Some of his people were angered about the marriage. But on the other hand, all the protests in the South African press made them say, who is to tell us who our king should be? So they stood behind him, and eventually, reluctantly, the regent stood aside. But the British and the South Africans conspired, and documents that are now public show that they conspired to arrange his exile, because the British emphasized their trade with South Africa, their investments in South Africa, and this relationship was going to upset the apple cart. He was allowed to return only in 1956 after renouncing his chieftainship, and they thought that he would no longer be an obstacle. Ha ha. Okay, there's a film. You can get it from Netflix. It's called The United Kingdom. It has some beautiful photography. I think, title's kind of a pun, because it's about the British, their country, United Kingdom, and then the United Kingdom of the Nwato, and actually all the people in Botswana against the exile of their leader and their interference in their internal affairs. So this is quite a good film. I like it. It has some slight errors historically, but very slight compared with most Hollywood. Some photos of them, and this is interesting in terms of the future. You see their oldest child, Jackie, their next child, Ian, and then a few years later, the twins, Chikedi and Tony. The latter, the boys are all around today, and you're going to see they played an important role. What I'm emphasizing is the role of the founder in setting the stage for a country's development, the long-term impact he had. Since he couldn't be a chief, a king, he created a moderate political party, fairly conservative political party. Why was he successful in doing that? Because to local people, rural people, he had impeccable credentials as their heir, the grandson of the great Kama, the chief who under David Livingstone's influence had converted to Christianity and set the stage for the country's future. But to more modern or well-educated Botswana, he also had an impeccable Western education, legal education. He'd inherited his family's wealth. The British hadn't taken that away from him. So he didn't need as many young leaders in third world countries. He didn't need somehow an economic base. He had it already. So he promoted the rule of law, free elections, free markets. He even put some of people who were allied with him in jail for corruption. He reduced the powers of chiefs like himself, and as a chief, he was probably the only one who could do that. And then he managed to find a delicate balance between the liberation struggles going on around Botswana and having to get almost all Botswana's imports from South Africa. He founded a regional organization, the Frontline States, and the South African Development Community Summit, which you'll see later on is very important today. But most of all, he promoted non-racialism, and his family, of course, was an example of non-racialism. Now this you can look at very quickly. I don't want to bore you with too much of it, but it was among the 5 least developed countries in the world. It had no major tarred roads. It was dependent on its neighbors. Its currency was the South African rand. It got budget support from Britain. It had no military, and its capital was just moved from Mafeking to Gaborone. Now, the assets were it was politically stable, as I said, not corrupt, market-oriented, and here's a big plus. The Western powers worried about how to deal with apartheid and racialism in Southern Africa with the Portuguese and Rhodesia, as well as South Africa, were eager to support a black-ruled, independent democracy. And there was a lot of aid coming to supplement the British budgetary support, and huge support, particularly from the Nordic states, the Scandinavian countries. The key, the parliament, which still functions today, built in 1966, and reflects the nature of Botswana as a democracy. Okay, you can see the capital has grown. When we returned in 1978, and I took this picture in 79. You can see those government buildings way in the background up here, and a fairly major shopping mall downtown. We lived in a prefab house called Monte Carlo for some inane reason, and these are our boys and our Welsh corgi, and this was actually in 1980, we've been there a while, and if you water the desert, everything grows beautifully. So the bougainvillea, which was less than a foot high, was already growing over the roof. My workplace was the University of Botswana. The covered walkways, because it could get pretty damn hot during the day. I remember temperatures of 105, but a country of 2.5 million people. This is President Bush arriving in 2003, when we happened to be there again with another one of these groups. And you can see they had, by this time, a brand new airport. No DC-3s like the ones we flew in on and landed right over our house, but a brand new airport that could take a 747 safely. In 2004, we were in Botswana visiting, and the new president, Festus Mogai, who was a financial expert and succeeded Masiri, was in charge. We were there for the opening of a mall, which Linda Kalhetswe had organized. This is one of the cabinet ministers, and look, here I am standing there, a foreigner. Most of them didn't know who I were. Here's the protection for the president. One policewoman, and probably there was another police car nearby. And it gives you some idea of the stability and security of this African state at that time, almost 40 years after it had become independent. The more recent president, none other than Ian Seretse-Khama, the son of the first president, who moved from his military career to the presidency. Fortunately or unfortunately, had a falling out with his own successor, where you'll see in a minute, and he's now living in South Africa, how ironic, and is supporting opposition parties. So it could be in the next election in 2024 that a new party will come to power, a coalition for the first time. Okay, a meeting of two presidents, and I say similar, but very different. Seretse-Khama, a European mother and an African father, like Barack Obama, but one born to aristocracy and the other born to ordinary people. One who grew up always in a privileged situation, one who came from a background that was not affluent or not special. Another visit by someone well known, not the president himself, but Michelle Obama, took her family, and she was there really supporting the AIDS struggle in Botswana, supporting the struggle against AIDS, meeting with Khama. And I'm particularly proud of this picture I found online of our arrival, because the cabinet minister who was greeting her, Gloria Solonikai, was one of my students in 1978, 79. And then we also, when we were back in 2013, met with the family that would live next to us. The young man there went to Maumee Valley in Toledo, came here and lived with us for a few years. He eventually went to Hope College up in Michigan, and he was a graduate of that, and now back with his family in Botswana many years later. There we go. The same year, you can see the mall. Looks pretty much the same. A lot of informal sellers. That's actually the building, part of the building that Chris's office with Price Waterhouse was when she was there for the 3 years, 78 to 81. You saw the SODEC headquarters in 2001 were there. By 2010, the organization had expanded in its importance for the region considerably, promoting economic development, promoting linkages among the countries of the region, all now independent of their African majority rule. And shortly after while we were there, the new diamond sorting facility had come online, the most modern, with windows so that people could look at the colors and see the colors in natural light within the diamonds. This was one of the benefits of Botswana's being stable, having a good relationship with foreign investors, particularly beers, because instead of just taking the diamonds out of the country, they built the modern processing, sorting facilities in the country, so all of this wouldn't be done in Israel or in Amsterdam or in London. And then by 2020, they had totally outgrown that facility, and this is what the new one looked like. As far from what I read, one of the most modern sorting facilities in the world. And Botswana is, I believe, still the world's largest producer of diamonds, with the wealth having been invested in the country and not funneled abroad to villas on the Riviera or as happened with Mobutu in Congo or happened in Sierra Leone or other countries. So Botswana diamonds are not blood diamonds a la Leo DiCaprio. When we were back in 2013, Krista took some good pictures of the new facility. She loved the reflections in the glass at the University of Botswana, which had become very modern, highly developed place. And indeed, there was now a second technological university in Botswana in the north, attracting students from all over the region, not just from Botswana. An Olympic-sized outdoor swimming pool was built quite a while back, and that reminds me when we were there in the Cub Scout Pack, they exchanged some messages with Toledo, and one of the messages a boy wrote, how his dad would only let him go swimming for maybe 20 minutes in the winter, where the temperatures get down in the 40s at night, or maybe in the high 30s, but where it never freezes. And so this is a facility that could be used pretty much year-round. It shows how far they've gone when you have, what is that, the high diving board? In 2013, their new major athletic facility was under construction, dwarfs anything at the University of Toledo, except the stadium, of course, but any indoor facility at the University of Toledo. New medical school and associated with the university and teaching hospital. The sign on the bottom, I've grafted in, was put up by the Chinese construction company that was building it in 2013 when we were there. One of the sources of corruption these days is the very large Chinese presence in southern Africa. They've come to dominate the construction industry. And in the case of this facility, it didn't come online until this year, or last year. And the reason for that was poor design and poor construction, so a lot had to be redone. But financed by Botswana, not by foreign aid, financed by diamonds. This is what the capital looks like today. Obviously, I borrowed these later pictures from online. Back over here is that old diamond sorting building and the government buildings you saw, and the mall, which looked impressive earlier, but it's now dwarfed by the reality of a new business district in what's become a major city in southern Africa, perhaps 300,000 population. Oops, let me go back a second. Off on the side, up on the top right, that's the water supply you saw earlier on. Okay, back to the border, the place I told you to remember, where you saw the dugout canoes and the old ferry. Well, because of instability in Zimbabwe under Mugabe and his successor, a lot of traffic would bypass and take the more recent ferry across the river, and if I hadn't had to drop it, you would have seen a lot of trucks lined up. And this new cable-stayed bridge, like our bridge in Toledo, is a railroad and road bridge that has now opened and carrying the traffic. You might say, why in the world did they build a curved bridge instead of going straight across? Well, the reason was Zimbabwe, which rightly feared that this bridge would cause economic activity to bypass their transit system, their railways. And so they were unwilling to contribute and join in. So here's the 500-foot border. Here's the new bridge, nicely evading Zimbabwe, skirting Namibia, and going into Zambia. And now, as the bridge comes online, the Zimbabwe government wants back in and wants its share of the traffic. But I'm not sure they're going to get it. You can see the length, you can see the way it was financed, and the number of international partners involved in that effort. So Botswana is still very attractive to investors. The current president, who came to power in 2018 after Kama, and I don't know that much about him. I've never encountered him personally. Okay, summing up, here's the story of a middle-income country that came from nowhere. Look at those percent changes in gross domestic product. Look at the changes in amounts and percentage. Because Botswana's cost of living is considerably lower than the U.S., the per capita income of $7,500 a year probably seriously understates what that will buy for the average person in Botswana. Okay, there's some downsides. If the same party stays in power for 50-some years, that opens the door to problems, corruption, stagnation. And it's produced high levels of inequality, as occurred in a lot of capitalist countries, and unemployment. And especially in deals with the Chinese, there is a perception, I don't know how accurate, of corruption. I think it's probably accurate. But also still excessive dependence on diamonds. And then a lot of concerns about environmental protection versus making land and resources available to people. And controversies about the hunter-gatherer minority, the San Bushmen people, who were in the past treated as servants, almost as slaves, and who the government decided to relocate from their hunter-gatherer places in what became game parks to settle villages. The government arguing that should a child of these people have the opportunity for education, should there be health care, should there be proper sanitation. But the international court struck that down, saying they've been deprived of their rights to choose their own standard of living, which could also mean the children of these people continuing that tradition, but not having the opportunities that other Botswana citizens have. And like other countries, they have issues with AIDS and COVID. But with COVID, I believe the Omicron virus was discovered in Botswana and South Africa first, and their labs did a lot of the research going back to the reasons Bush and Clinton were there so many years ago. Okay, now just a little bit on natural wonders as I wind up. I showed you that we went to the Nada area. Oops, I hit the button by mistake. The Nada area where the great pans are, the runoff from the swamps, where you have brines, and now they're mines for soda ash and a burgeoning chemicals industry from that soda ash. We crossed the Kalahari, went around the Delta and up to the north. And the Delta, here's a country, a desert country that has a swamp in the middle of the desert. Because the river comes on a very gentle gradient from 1,000 miles away in Angola, and it arrives in the driest season in Botswana. So we had the experience of being in a hotel surrounded by dry lake, waking up the next morning and finding it surrounded by water. With no rain as the water came in. This is a vital resource for Botswana. And indeed, it's one of the things that at one point they were talking of mobilizing their military because the Angolans and Namibians through which the water crosses wanted to build dams which would restrict the flow for their own use. And Botswana said, if you're going to cut off the water, you're going to face problems with us. Okay, just a little look at some of the pans with some of the birds. Up on the top left is the smallest of primates, a bush baby, as it's called, coming down to feed on fruit that was put out for us at our hotel. Then we were over crossing the Kalahari, trying baobab trees growing out there. This is the tree, the legend says God, it was very arrogant, very beautiful. So God turned it upside down and put its roots up in the air. So it does green up at sometimes in the year, but it looks like this a lot of the time. When I say big in Botswana, my son, who's 6'2", standing next to a termite mound. And those thorn bushes, the thorns grow big in Botswana. Then we stayed at a place called Drotsky's on the Okavango River. My wife and Heidi, who's sitting next to her, we were there together with my son. This gives you a little idea what swampy ground looks like, and a traditional mokoro dugout canoe that people use to get around. It never gets very deep, so you use a pole and pull yourself around. And this was in the early stage. We were there before the river really had risen to flood levels. That doesn't change yet. You move forward. As we went out in the boat right along the river, we saw an incredible variety of birds. And again, you have swamp game and swamp birds mixed up with desert game and desert birds. So this is a haven for people who want to go out and see wildlife. It has some of the biggest herds of elephant in the world that work together. Again, as we were in a river environment, down at the bottom, you see the big ones. One of the most dangerous animals in Africa, because they come out to graze every night. And if you get between them and the water on their way back, you have trouble. And they can run very fast, much faster than you can, despite their immense size. And then you don't want to go swimming in that water, that's for sure, or wading, because the big guys are there. We went up right to the border with Namibia, and from the village called Shakawi, there was a ferry going across. I don't have a picture of it, but opening this year in the final stages of construction is another cable-stayed bridge, which will connect the people on the east and the people on the west. In the easy manner, not the slow ferry route. Okay, we went out for a ride with a bush pilot. He looked about 22, 23. He's South African. We heard his tale of woe, how the Peace Corps gal he'd had an affair with had just gone home, and how was he, the son of a Dutch Reformed minister and a gospel singer, going to repent, and could he be saved? A 22-year-old with angst. But anyway, he was a good pilot, and we got back safely. This is what the river looks like as it comes into what will become the swamp. And later on, that would all be flooded. Shows what the village we left from looked like from the air, sparsely settled. And then the inhabitants of the swamp on the top, that you wouldn't see that up from ground level so well. Buffalo, again, a very dangerous animal. And elephants, probably less dangerous than you think, because they don't really bother with you very much. The water's starting to come up, but still very low by comparison in the northern end of the swamp. From the air, we saw the TOLEDO Hills, what they call Big Papa, Mama, and the Baby Hill. This is a national, a World Heritage Site, one of the places where humankind had its origins. There are several in southern Africa, but this is one that's now thought to be a highly probable source for later out-migrations and the mixing of people who later went out to the rest of the world and just at the bottom of family compound. The next day we went to the TOLEDO Hills, and you could see Big Papa in the background, but cattle everywhere on the roads. You've got to watch out for them at night. Some of the magnificent cave paintings, they're spread all over, particularly Big Mama, the Mother Hill, as they call it. And then after we visited, we started to go back home across the desert. On the bottom right are some of the traditional inhabitants of the region, the earliest peoples there, the people who speak the Klip languages, the San, or as the foreigners call the Bushmen, who I talked about earlier. And then on the left, you can see you find all kinds of other inhabitants along the dirt roads. But the main road was tarred. Okay, what would be an appropriate ending? I've talked about how Botswana is linked to the rest of the world, how 2 U.S. presidents have visited, so I thought this would be an appropriate symbol. The Botswana kids are wearing the colors of their country on their pictures. Thank you.
You have questions for Dick?
I was wondering, why Prince Harry and Prince William, they go to Botswana? Why are they very interested?
Well, let me think. Harry got interested in Lesotho with the AIDS epidemic. And I think he was the initiator. He went there, he was out with kids in the country, and some of the assets of his mother's trust were invested there. And probably they heard about it from their parents who traveled, or from their uncle, Andrew, who was there with the Queen on that visit that you saw. And then, you know, Botswana, a successful country nearby, they visited. There was one time when Harry had a girlfriend from Rhodesia for a long, long time. So they found it a fascinating area. And there was another reason also. But Lesotho is a monarchy, a constitutional monarchy, unlike Botswana, which is a presidential system. And Lesotho's king and his brother, the current king, Maumee III, and his brother have had close interactions with the British monarchy. And in fact, he was at the Queen's funeral, let's see, of the king. One of the relatively small number of people who was invited. So it was that relationship, the younger brother of the Lesotho king, who bonded with the younger brother of the now Prince of Wales. So those are parts of the relationship.
Thank you.
What's the main language?
Pardon?
The main language that they speak there?
In Lesotho and Botswana and a lot of South Africa on the high plateau, they speak a language called Setswana or Sesotho. And these are people who share common ethnic heritage, even though they may be divided into different political units. So all the way over to Johannesburg, you have Sotho speaking people, down into Lesotho, across the Free State province of South Africa, out into the Kalahari area. So Sesotho, Setswana. They're a little differentiated. Setswana hasn't adapted so many foreign words like from the San people. So the Sotho say, oh, these people speak like our great-grandfathers. And the Lesotho, the Swana hear the people from the Sotho speak, they can understand. And they say these people have no pride, they've taken in all these foreign words. So you can get disagreements, but they're in effect dialects of the same mother language.
I saw a lot of English on some of the signs, so I was wondering, they never see that as a second or third language?
Well, almost all the young people who've been to school are fluent in English. And after both the Sotho and Botswana were British colonies, so English has been established for a long time. And for that matter, South Africa's had English as Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, as a national language for a long time. Yeah.
Did that language have a written script, or was it just a spoken?
I'm sorry, I'm not here.
Did the language have a written script, or is it just a spoken language?
It would have been missionaries like the French evangelicals in Lesotho or Livingston and the London Mission Society who first wrote the language down. It was not a written language at the time that foreign contact happened, but it had a rich culture associated with it and with widely shared kind of language. By the way, I should say that Livingston's, one of his earliest missions in his move to the north from Koroman in South Africa. He was settled in southern Botswana for a number of years. You could go and see the ruins of his church. And then moved further north where he encountered the Kamas and the Iwato, and then up into what's now Zimbabwe, with, Victoria Falls and on up until he wound up in Tanganyika, where it was discovered by Stanley.
What's the connection between Alexander McCall Smith and Botswana?
I think when we were there in 78 or 79, he was teaching at the university. And he did a really good job of understanding the culture as it was then. So firstly, his detective agency presents that. And by the way, those videos are available online too. And many of them give very good images of the country. And in Maura Motswe, he's captured very much the kind of style and persona of women in Botswana, who play both traditional roles, but as she does, move into modern ones as a detective.
Dick, with the modest corruption and with the diamond money staying mostly in Botswana, is Botswana seen as a kind of a model for other African nations?
Is it what?
Is it a model for other African nations to emulate?
It certainly is a model. It's doing pretty well. It's still developing quite rapidly. Unfortunately, corrupt politicians, wherever they are particularly interested in models which diminish their accumulation of wealth. And so there are a lot of countries where the resource curse still prevails. Look at the ongoing war in the east of the Congo. It's a war over cobalt, diamonds, the resources of Congo. A number of countries have done much better, like Ghana, but there are unfortunately many, like maybe Southern Sudan and Somalia, that have not.
Other questions? Well, Dick, I want to thank you for your very interesting presentation on Botswana. It was a remarkable transformation that you showed us. So join me in thanking Dick.